Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our Thursday night football preview for tonight's matchup between the Texans and the Jets. Going to get you ready for all of your exposure tonight. With first off, a look at the DraftKings Showdown side, how I'm approaching some of my GPP builds, and then afterwards, a look at the Underdog and Prize Picks side, giving you a few props that have already entered for tonight's game. You might want to consider adding to a few slips yourself. So a lot to go through here. Let's go ahead and not waste any time at all and start off with first off a look at the Showdown side and started off with a look at the injury report as well. Though we don't have any players questionable for tonight, we definitely have some guys that are missing this game. So first and foremost, you get Stephon Diggs, who's going to be out for quite some time. Nico Collins, who was rolled out a few weeks ago. So two of the top receiving options for the Texans not going to be suiting it up tonight. Then on the other side of things, we've got Allen Lazard, who's been rolled out as well. So whether it's Tank Dell becoming the #1 receiver for the Texans, players like Amechi, Xavier Hutchinson potentially being in play for the Texans tonight, or even guys like a Mike Williams or Xavier Gibson getting a little bit of extra snaps and usage out there for the Jets, there's going to be a trickle-down effect out there for both teams. So when we go player by player, I'll make sure to point out some of those examples. But outside of those three players that have already been rolled out, not that much that we're keeping an eye on before lock. So at least a slate that's maybe not as complicated out there from the injury angle. But now let's talk about game theory, where I think there's an edge out here for this evening. So the chalk is going to be favoring towards the Jets side, but I think when you take a look at each team in particular, that they're not really being played the right way. So first and foremost, I think the Texans going to be a little bit lower owned than the Jets side, and Texans-led lineups are going to have a whole lot of Joe Mixon. Part of that is because he's the most expensive player, also your highest projecting player on the entire slate, and also because that's what they've relied on here in 2024. They've been a much more rushing-heavy offense here this season compared to what they had last year, and though it hasn't been a terrible start, it hasn't been as flashy or as sexy as what we had there in 2023. So I think a lot of people that are going to play that Texans side, that are going to assume that maybe they go out there and win on the road tonight, are going to use Joe Mixon at the captain spot. And while I do think that that is a viable way for them to go out there and win this evening, I don't think it's the only way, right? Must we forget that CJ Stroud was one of the best fantasy quarterbacks of all in 2023, and that was as a rookie. So he's got more experience now. I know he's missing a few of his top-end wide receivers, but whether it's a Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz, or one of those backups like Hutchinson or Mechie, I think there's a lot of upside through the air over there on the Texans. So I think that whether you're going with the chalkier Jet side or if you're even playing a Joe Mixon-led Texans lineup, that's going to be relatively popular tonight. You're not going to be getting that different going with either of those kind of options, but I think maybe my favorite sneaky stack for tonight might be going with the passing side over there for Houston, as I mentioned, or going over there in the Jets and playing Breece Hall at captain. I think you're going to see a lot of people try to use Devontae Adams, maybe a Garrett Wilson from the Jets at captain. I'm not sure how many are going to go to a Breece Hall and assume that it's the rushing that goes out there and gets them there. So I think if you're playing in large field GPPs, you might want to try and think of some of those creative ways to get a little bit different, because if you're playing a 4-2 Jet stack, you're going to be duplicated with a lot of other people most likely. And even if you went with like a 4-2 Texans lineup, again, the team that is being stacked a little bit less, if you're doing it with Joe Mixon, I don't know how much that's going to get you different there. So let's go player by player. So first off, Joe Mixon is a whole $11,000. I don't think he's a terrible play by any means this evening, but at the same time, you're paying a hefty price tag for the kind of ceiling that he brings. And if you're going to play the Texans side, especially if you're going to go with like a 4-2 or a 5-1, I think he makes a lot of sense in that kind of build, but just know that you're not getting as much leverage as probably what you're hoping for. I've got him at nearly 20% at the captain spot, so that shows you how many people are going to Mixon if they're going with that Texans heavy lineup, which has him as the highest owned player on the entire slate. Breece Hall, I mentioned, as a potentially lower owned option out there at captain, but even he's close to 20% himself. So if you went with that Jets heavy offense, you're not going to be as different, at least at the captain spot, but the trickle down effect with the rest of your lineup is where you can get that leverage with the Breece Hall led lineup. So it's not so much that he's low owned that I think it could be a spot to get different to the field. It's avoiding guys like an Adam, a Garrett Wilson. Obviously Aaron Rodgers is over 50% owned himself there at $9,000. If you're playing a Breece Hall, maybe you're playing like one of those other three players, but you're probably not taking two or three of them like you would be otherwise. So when you add up the combined ownership of just taking Breece Hall plus one of the other players, and then you combine it to taking Rodgers plus Adams and a Garrett Wilson, you can see why it's a little bit lower owned to go with the option with Breece Hall plus one of those other three players. CJ Stroud here at 10 grand, he's maybe my favorite play on the slate, at least when it comes to upside compared to price. He's not my favorite cash play as he has a slightly lower floor than an Aaron Rodgers, but as I've already mentioned, I know that they've been more rushing heavy this year. CJ Stroud is still an absolute baller, and I know the defense also adds into that, so it's not just the fact that the Texans have been more rushing heavy this year, the matchup also plays into them running the ball more too. So I don't disagree with that sentiment completely, but I think people are completely overlooking CJ Stroud here. Like, he posted 300 plus yards per game last year. This guy had, sub 5 interceptions on the entire year, lit it up in terms of passing touchdowns as well. I know he's missing some of his good guys out there, but let's not act like he's completely incapable out here for Thursday Night Football. So, $10,000, he's the lowest owned of all the quarterbacks on the slate, 44% as opposed to 54% over there with Rodgers. So I don't know, might he find intriguing to say the very least. I'm going to group these two wide receivers together out there for New York. So you got Adams and a Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson has seen more targets than Davante Adams so far, but in the red zone, it's been the opposite. Adams has been getting more of the looks down there within the 20, which you would expect with the chemistry that Adams and Rodgers have. It's much more of a larger wide receiver, a little bit better at high pointing the football as well. So better suited out there for that red zone coverage, as opposed to Garrett Wilson, who's more of that yardage PPR monster. So if you're going to try and get some correlation between your quarterback and wide receiver, I think Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers would be my preferred option. But if I was going with a buyback, trying to find a high points per dollar sort of play, maybe somebody that gets there with their PPR upside, and that's where I like Garrett Wilson a little bit more. So if I'm looking for a buyback, I think Garrett Wilson is my favorite in terms of a Jets wide receiver. But if I'm looking for a core stack, let's say I'm going out there and playing Davante Adams at captain or something like that, I would like pairing him up there with Aaron Rodgers. Tank Dell is going to be extremely popular. In fact, this 36% ownership number is probably only going to go up as the day goes on, as he's the clear number one wide receiver for the Texans. Unfortunately, he's a lot more expensive than he usually is because of the fact that you have Collins and Diggs rolled out. So DraftKings went out there, tried to account for that in their pricing algorithm, and may have actually overdone it a little bit, as he's more expensive than an Aaron Rodgers at $9,000. He's only $400, $600 cheaper than those two stud wide receivers for the Jets, which, as the number one wide receiver, he's going to have plenty of opportunity to go around, but he should probably be closer to $8,000. So I think that he's going to be chalky. He is still worth mixing in because he is that number one wide receiver, but I guess a little bit of buyer beware there, as he's not going to be as low owned as probably what you would hope for. Dalton Schultz here at $7,000. With Diggs, Collins out, I think a lot of people are going to go to a Tank Dell, some of those backup wide receivers. And while Dalton Schultz isn't going to see an increase in his snap share, he is going to see an increase in his usage and his target share out there for the Texans. So you can see I still have him at around a 10.5 point projection, which is pretty modest for this portion of the board. But he's got a lot more red zone upside now, as now he's the clear number one red zone target that they have on the team. Tank Dell, pretty good route runner. I'd comp him a lot to a Garrett Wilson. He doesn't really have that size or that high point ability as what you get out there with the Dalton Schultz. So I think if you're going to stack up somebody with a CJ Stroud, just like I was mentioning with Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers, I think my favorite combination out there for the Texans would be a CJ Stroud and then a Dalton Schultz. Not only is that a little bit cheaper, it's only $17,000 combined salary if you went with those two. You're getting a lot of that touchdown correlation as well. Tyler Conklin here, a little bit too expensive for my liking. See only a 1.2 points per dollar projection right there, but has been extremely productive the last few weeks. So on a heater, you'd be a little bit crazy to completely overlook him. These kickers are actually a little bit more expensive than they should be. The points per dollar value is still decent, as both are projecting for over 8 fantasy points. The Texans defense is for sure too expensive out here. They've been having a lot of sacks, a lot of turnovers, which boosts their projection, but they're the underdogs tonight, and normally an underdog defense is closer to like $3,000 to $3,500, and they're $4,600 tonight. So I think if you're going to play a Texans heavy lineup, maybe you find the salary to go out there and force them in, but they're not the best play on paper just because of that price tag. Braylon Allen has been extremely efficient on a per touch basis. He likely needs a touchdown though to get there at $4,400, or potentially a Breece Hall injury, which is a low percentage outcome, but certainly not impossible. Xavier Hutchinson's my favorite wide receiver from the Texans. You have those two injuries that we've talked about extensively, but Xavier Hutchinson has the most playing time out there with CJ Stroud. You had player like Mechie last year. He was dealing with cancer, obviously didn't play at all out there for the Texans. Hutchinson saw a ton of playing time and had a few really big games out there with CJ Stroud as well. So though it hasn't been the best 2024, part of that is opportunity with having such good wide receivers ahead of you on the depth chart. But now that you've had a few injuries there, he's going to have that opportunity come back up. So he's $4,000. He was priced up to account for the fact that you had all of those injuries, but still a player that could easily score tonight. He's got that kind of upside, and I like his PPR aspect as well. He's a possession kind of wide receiver that it wouldn't surprise me if you saw him get 4 or 5 catches tonight. Mike Williams is in the doghouse out there for the Jets. He's $3,600, so he is extremely affordable tonight. The unfortunate part is that he's likely going to play a little bit less, and that's even with Allen Lazard being out of the lineup. I think that's the only saving grace for Mike Williams playing snaps, because if they had Lazard, those top 2 stud wide receivers, he probably wouldn't even see the field, because what you've seen from him, Aaron Rodgers that is, out there in interviews, is that he loves Xavier Gibson and his yards after catch ability. He's their punt returner, kick returner, so you know he's got some juice out there with his jukes and all that. He's only $1,200. I actually think between these 2 wide receivers that Xavier Gibson might be the player that you want to get to, because I can see him playing just as much, if not more, than Mike Williams, and they both have that yard after catch ability. I mean, Mike Williams, very physical, very fast wide receiver, as a home run play threat every single time he touches the field. Well, that's the same thing with Gibson, and Gibson might play nearly as much, if not more, than a Mike Williams, in my opinion, and he's $1,200 as opposed to $3,600. So I do want to point out those 2 wide receivers, as Allen Lazard being out matters, but maybe the one that gets the biggest benefit is the one that you guys weren't expecting. Robert Woods is going to play a lot more for the Texans. He's a really good run blocker, so I think if they get ahead, that Robert Woods is going to play even more. I've heard a lot of people mentioning a Mechie, mentioning guys like a Hutchinson, not so much Robert Woods. So if his ownership is going to be extremely low, potentially worth mixing in out there in GPPs. John Mechie III, from all accounts, an extremely talented player. Just, we don't really know what to expect from him. So a little bit of a wild card out there for tonight, but sometimes wild cards end up working out very much so into the positive. So we'll have to see. Maybe he'll surprise us, go out there and be the number 2 wide receiver out there for the Texans. Dare Ogunbowale. I tried out there at the last name. He might play a little bit more with Dameon Pierce out. He's already been rolled out for tonight's game. That was, I guess, the 4th injury that I should have mentioned before, but a little bit of a smaller injury, smaller situation compared to the other 3 that we went through. Ogunbowale, though, could get a few snaps because he is the backup running back, but he's a backup running back. So unless there's an injury out there to mix in, or they're playing from way ahead or way behind, he's probably not going to get there. I more so prefer guys like Gibson, who we've already went through, a Cade Stover, or even a Jeremy Ruckert. They're both the backup tight ends for their respective teams. Stover could see more snaps with all those stud wide receivers for the Texans out. Right? Maybe they go with more 2 tight end sets if they're going out there and trying to run the ball. Maybe some play action to somebody like a Cade Stover, maybe a touchdown down there in the red zone. And then Jeremy Ruckert, he's been playing like 30% of snaps out there for the Jets anyways. He's down here at $1,000, and he's also probably got to score a touchdown to go out there and get to the optimal, but at least they're going to be on the field, and at least they do use these 2 tight end sets. So there are a few players down here that you could get to as a pure flyer play. My favorite being Xavier Gibson if you're going the whole way down the board. Then maybe a Cade Stover, Jeremy Ruckert, worth a few shots maybe out there in GPPs. But these guys like Hutchinson, Mechie, maybe even a Robert Woods here at $3,000, those are going to be your pieces of value that you're getting to, partially because of the injury situation opening up value, and also because of the super soft price tag down here at sub $4,000. And now for the prop side of things, where I've got 2 props I've already entered. You might want to consider adding to a few slips yourself. So first prop is going to be this over on Tank Dell receptions, which is -135 for his over on DraftKings. FanDuel, sites like Pinnacle also have him slightly juiced towards the over. So a little bit of sportsbook line value that we've got in our back pocket. And then from the traditional analysis perspective, also checks out from that perspective as well. So you've got Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs not playing tonight, is going to open up a lot of extra snap share, and most importantly, target share out there for a Tank Dell. And considering that he can hide himself away out there in the slot a little bit, might not have to go against the elite tier cornerbacks out there for the Jets, I like this kind of over. So you give me the injury situation, you give me that sportsbook line value, it's something that I thought was a no-brainer to go out there and mix in. And then the prop I'm combining this with is going to be an under on Aaron Rodgers interceptions, who historically is one of the better quarterbacks in NFL history when it comes to protecting the football. And though this season hasn't been up to his standards, This is a must-win game. They are home favorites tonight, and I would expect the Jets to take more of a rushing-heavy approach. The Texans secondary has been causing a lot of turnovers this year, so you would expect Aaron Rodgers to know that and to probably not try and force the ball into double coverage. He's a smart quarterback. He's now got multiple elite-tier wide receivers to get to, so he's not going to have to force the ball into double, triple coverage all that often. If somebody like Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams is going to get a one-on-one, well, he's going to take that shot as opposed to the guy that's getting double or tripled. So I like the sportsbook line value here as well. He was minus 130 for the under on a few books, and that minus 120, minus 125 range at the very least for most of the major sportsbooks out there. So just like the Tank Dell prop, a little bit of sportsbook line value on top of that traditional analysis, and hence why I'll take this out here for a slip. And you could say that there's a little bit of correlation between these two, not enough where Prize Picks is going to ding you in terms of the payout, because if Aaron Rodgers is going to go under on interceptions, maybe that is because they are playing with the lead, going out there, taking the air out of the football a little bit. And on the flip side, if the Jets are playing from ahead, well, an underdog like the Tank Dell-led Houston are probably going to have to pass the ball a little bit more to offset that. So I think that you could say that there's a little bit of correlation here, but more so worried about the traditional analysis and that sportsbook line value that we're mixing in. Not a ton that I liked over here in Underdog, so it's just going to be these two prop slips for now, or these two props, let's say, single prop slip out there for now. But make sure to check out my Patreon page for all the different pieces of exposure that I'm getting to, as well as that DFS sheet that you saw on the fantasy section. On there, you can download that entire spreadsheet completely uncensored with all my projections, player pool, stack info on there for you guys, and everything updating there before lock. So if there's any last second injury news that goes out there and changes the slate, well, that'll all be accounted for out there for my Patreon members. And over here on the prop side of things, if you want to see anything I take on Underdog there before lock or any additional Prize Picks exposure, the Patreon page is the place to be for all of that. So it's $15 a month to go out there, join the DFS tier. Prop tiers, the same amount, gives you all the different websites out there for props. So you're not going to get price gouged in the process, right? This isn't a website that's going to cost you $100 a month. It gives you all that behind the scenes access. If you want golf, same price as some of the football stuff is, but if you want all the football stuff I have to offer, it's $25 a month. That'll give you the DFS and the prop component there. Great deal. Make sure to check it out. Link in the description of the video to go out there and check out the Patreon page. But that's all I've got out here for Thursday Night Football. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for the Thursday Night Football preview. Before you hopping out of here, go ahead, smash that like button for me, and also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. That, of course, will include our main slate preview, Monday Night Football preview out there for this weekend, and all the content throughout the rest of the year. So best of luck with all the exposure that you guys are getting to. Hopefully one of our members can go out there and get a takedown and make this Thursday a profitable one. Also, happy Halloween to everyone out there as well. If you're celebrating with friends, family, your kids, whatever the case may be, hopefully it is a fantastic night for all of you out there, whether it's over here on the DFS streets or over there in real life with your Halloween celebrations. I hope that it's a fantastic one for all of you guys. So best of luck, as I already mentioned before. Also, feel free to comment down below who you've got as your top fantasy score on tonight's slate. If you can give me that top score and their actual raw score within 2 fantasy points, you will win a free month of that Patreon page. So as I mentioned before, that's where you can find all the behind the scenes content that I'm going with, including all my projections, player pool, stack info that you see for DFS, and every single prop slip and the reasoning for all the props that I'm taking there on Patreon as well. So make sure to give me your top score, the projection within 2 fantasy points, and let's go out there and have ourselves a night. I appreciate your support in the channel, guys. Best of luck, as I've mentioned a few times already, and let's get after it.